Okay, so I'm not going to sit on the fence. I've been asked a few times on my opinion on what I think is going to happen with interest rates going forward. So by no means is this something to rest your hat on. It's just what I believe to be my opinion of what's going to happen with interest rates over the next couple of years. Given where we are at the moment, do I think interest rates in the short term are going to continue to rise? Answer, yes. I think that the inflation and everything else that's going on around us in the world at the moment is going to make sure that the Bank of England rate does creep up. Do I think that's sustainable? No. Where do I think the Bank of England base rate will end up? Circa 2.5–3% is what I believe the base rate to be by the time that these rate rises have not finished, but by the time we've reached a point, which is where my main issue is, we reach a point where I think the rates are going to top out. One thing to bear in mind, and I think there's something that we need to factor, is if we look back to earlier on in the year, where the base rate was at 0.1% for a while, and the rates we were being offered were as low as 0.8 something or 0.9%. So what the lenders were charging, what the banks and building societies were charging us over the Bank of England's base rate was only 0.8, 0.9%. Very cheap. However, historically it has been cheaper than that still, but let's just bear that in mind for now. So just going back to the beginning of the year, 0.1% being offered rates of around 0.9%. It's hard to believe that was earlier this year. Now the base rate is 1.75% and the banks are charging at best 3.1, 3.2%, but more typically 3.3, 3.5%. So that margin that the banks are now charging above the Bank of England is actually 1.75% typically above where the base rate is. So not only is the base rate going up, but what the banks are charging us above that is also significantly higher as well. So you could say that the banks are aiming to profiteer from these rate rises, a bit the same way that the energy prices and the petrol stations, when they started going up, started to pump theirs up too. Or if you didn't want to be a bit skeptical about it, you could say that the lenders are trying to forecast further forward and think, well, if these continue to rise, then this is a fixed rate in which we think we can rest our hat on a little bit more for a bit more longer term security. It depends on the cynic in you as to which of those two you believe. As for me, I personally believe that the rates will continue to go up. The cost of living is going to continue to go up. And I think that we will have a winter of discontent. And everybody will be pushed beyond their comfort zones if we're not so already. So as a result, as inflation starts to come down, because everybody's not spending as much, and we're starting to see, which will happen more and more, default rates on loans, mortgages and cars and all sorts of things like that, lenders will then start to pull away. Their criteria will get tighter because they're then realizing as we enter into a recession that they need to be more careful with the money that they are lending because the risk of jobs is going and everything else. So if they want to control that, how do they control that? Do they keep pushing the prices up, or do they plateau off? Or if you get to a certain degree, they might go, actually we need to creep these down to make sure that we keep things moving. Because if not, just forget mortgages on houses that you're buying, but think of borrowing full stop. The economy, not just nationally but globally, is based upon lending. So I do think that there will be a little bit more squeeze yet, but I ultimately think that squeeze should come to an end probably in about another 18 months while we're in a recession. And then I think that there will be a short period of recovery as we begin to grow, but that stimulated is going to need to be maybe by rate drops, not drastic rate drops. I think that, for example, if the rates pushed up to 3, let's say even 3.5% as a base rate, I think that the rate might come back down to say 3 to 2.5%, but I then think it'll be sustainable in and around that kind of area. Longer term beyond that, who knows? Who could have predicted COVID? Who could have predicted many other things that are going on now? And better people than me have failed to see that. There are a few that did see that, but most of us, for the main part, didn't forecast any of that. So the ultimate question, which is the most asked question, do you do a 2-year or do you do a 5-year fixed? That's entirely down to your personal circumstances. Your circumstances will dictate which one is right or wrong. Just because you want longer term stability, which would necessarily suggest a 5-year might be better, but we'd also need to understand what your personal circumstances, your motivations are, and your financial basis, and lots of other factors as well, as to what is right for you as an individual. However, if it's a straight up fight between 2 years and 5-year fixed, if you base it upon my logic, I think you're still okay.